Are you looking for a reliable bow league starter that doesn't cost the earth to be able to complete higher tier maps? Are you looking for an extremely quick and beginner friendly build to dip your toe into the PoE waters? If so, then this might be the build guide that you're looking for. Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming and my league starter guide for 321 Crucible League. Now this guide is aimed at newer or brand new players, and if this guide ends up being a little too simplistic, there's a detailed POB, and it might be better to check out the 320 guide and related content. This guide is going to be split up into sections that are timestamped so you can easily rewatch sections again if needed. So the build that we're running with, again, this league is Raider Rain of Arrows. Firstly, I'm just going to talk about whether this build might be for you and the playstyle. Now I'm going to be honest and upfront. I would only play this build if you want to play a bow archetype character at league start. I'm sure there are better league start builds out there, but if you're looking for a bow character that's quick and can handle content on a budget, then this build is one of a few bow builds that can do it. And I really enjoyed playing this build last league. The playstyle is really easy as well. Everything other than dropping totems is automated. You're going to be cursing automatically, your auras provide the rest of your buffs, and outside of using Flasks regularly, which you will get automated later on, you just run around firing your rain of arrows. That's all there is to the build. There are no rotations, no complicated mechanics, you just shoot rain of arrows and stuff dies. Now the build relies on the keystone point blank, which means you do more damage to enemies the closer to them you are. So even though this is a ranged skill, you don't want to be across the other side of the map because you're going to really be gimping your damage. You want to be right on top of bosses, and with defenses that you've got on the build, you should be perfectly comfortable. Now overall, bow builds are not in the best place for low investment league starting, and only a few bow skills really shine at league start. However, they do excel with big investment, so there's always potential to swap from your Rain of Arrows build, which is a league starter variant, into a skill later on that does much more damage but needs some investment to make it feel much better. So TLDR, this build is cheap, safe, fast, and fun. Now for new players, this is the most detailed league start guide I've ever put together, when adding in all the written guides that supplement it, and numerous videos from last league on how to level and gear the character, including highlights from a league start last league. So without blowing my own trumpet, there are few other guides that are going to have this level of detail, which I think is going to massively help new or inexperienced players league starting. So in my normal video guides, I go into lots of details in the guides on gem links, gearing, progression. I explain every aspect of the build step by step and various other factors that are helpful. But it can make the guides overly long, and I think as a video format, that's not great. I think it's better to have shorter videos. So this time around, I've decided to make extremely detailed written guides and POBs to supplement the video guide, which is going to be more of a summary and overview of the build. I'm also going to link a playlist below where I've put in all the relevant videos from last league. Now, don't feel you have to watch these. They're just there for people that want to absorb as much information as possible and might enjoy watching the content. The only thing to be aware of when watching last league's content is I have made a few tweaks to the ascendancy and leveling trees to make the guide even better. So even though all of the information in those videos is relevant, when it comes to your skill trees, skills, and things like that, follow the path of building or the linked written guide. Let's move on and talk about the key interactions and aspects of the build. The build essentially has two stages: your early leveling super budget non-crit version, and a more expensive crit version, which you're going to transition into when you have the currency later on. It's a very easy switch and is fully explained in the written guide. Now the non-crit version can get you as high as red maps, and you could push pinnacle bosses on it, but it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. So I'd recommend once you get to T14 maps, you switch to a basic crit version before tackling the pinnacle bosses. It doesn't have to be super high budget, and as I say, there's full details in the written guide. Let's start with a non-crit variant, and this relies on two keystones: point blank and precise technique. Point blank essentially means the closer you get to enemies, the more damage you do, but if you're too far away, your damage starts to fall off, so make sure you're on top of enemies where you can. Precise technique gives you a massive 40% more damage if your accuracy is higher than your life, but you can't deal critical strikes. Now this is perfect for early game, since it will have very low crit chance and crit multiplier anyway. We picked this up as early as Act 2, and as soon as you pick it up, your DPS will ramp through the roof. It's always vital, however, to check that your accuracy is higher than your life. You can do so by being in any zone where you can use skills, so your hideout is ideal because you won't get attacked. Make sure your auras are active and press C on PC to go to your character screen. Select Rain of Arrows and the Offense tab and look for the main hand accuracy rating. If this is higher than your life, your buff is active. Now, if you start to struggle with accuracy rating and your life is creeping above it, there are some things you can do while you're leveling to remedy this. From Act 2 onwards, you're always going to run a low-level Precision Aura, which automatically gives a big boost to accuracy. You're also going to be taking some accuracy nodes on the tree. If you're still struggling, which you really shouldn't be, you can take a Bow Mastery that gives 100 accuracy per green socket in your equipped bow. And there's another Mastery that every point of dex you get gives you 3 accuracy, which again is going to be a huge boost to accuracy. So for anyone unaware, Masteries are nodes that can be taken when you take a lot of main passive points on the skill tree. Another button will open up where you can select from a number of Masteries. The only other thing you really need to be aware of when you're going through the campaign is to upgrade your bow every few acts if you can. Once you get a bow with 2 lots of elemental damage on it, the campaign will be a breeze. For the first 2 to 3 acts, just a vendor physical bow will do fine. Again, if you want to know how to craft that, full details in the written guide. With all these things coming together, Raider leveling feels amazing. You get Permanent Onslaught, which is increased action speed when you complete your first labyrinth in Act 3. Then in Act 8 to 10, when you do your second and third lab, you get even more Onslaught effect, bigger chance to evade, phasing, which means you can pass through enemies, and you'll be spell suppression capped. What this means is that all spells that hit you will only do 47% of their damage, which is a huge defensive buff to go into maps with. Now let's talk about map progression once you're through the campaign. Now you don't need to do much in the first few tiers of maps. Your campaign gear will get you comfortably through the first few tiers of white maps, since you only have to run the magic for completion. The only upgrades you really need to make in regards to gear and to push yellow maps is you want a 5-link chest, you want to buy or craft better bow and quivers, and we're going to go through how you do that now. So firstly, you either need to buy or farm a handful of Screaming Essences of Wrath and Screaming Essences of Woe. You're going to find an Imperial bow on the ground if you follow the loot filter that we're going to go over at the end of the video. All you need to do is use your Screaming Essence of Wrath on the Imperial bow. What that does is guarantee big lightning damage. Now this is important because you're going to be taking some lightning damage nodes. If you have a bow that has very little lightning damage on it, these nodes will do very little. All you're looking for when you use these essences is a second damage roll of either cold or fire, and that's going to do you. If you have an open suffix to craft attack speed at the bench, even better. The woe essence that we use on the quiver is going to force on damage with bows. All you're looking to do when you're rolling these is look for a second damage mod that isn't crit. So it can be projectile speed, any of the flat elemental damages, or attack speed. Make sure your resistance capped and you're good to go. A Devoto's Devotion helmet is a great early addition. If you're not speed running, by the time you get to maps, these should be 1 chaos. This is all you need to do to push into yellow maps and start earning currency. So now you're into yellow maps, you should have a good chunk of your Atlas completion done, meaning you're going to have some nodes to spend on the tree that you can start forcing some profitable league mechanics into your maps. Farm some currency if you need to get a better bow with bigger lightning damage on it, but try to stick with the gear you've got. Refer to the written guide for a detailed path of progression. Now, if you gear correctly, you should not need a 6-link until you get into red maps. The longer you can wait to buy one, the better, as they're just going to get cheaper and cheaper as the time ticks by, and early on in the league, they can be quite expensive. Now, at this stage, you should be able to complete Uber Lab. When you've done that, you're going to get your last ascendancy. This gives us 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments and a massive 20% exposure on enemies, and this is a big damage increase. Once you're there, I recommend buying a pair of 3-step assault unique boots. They're super common. Again, they'll be 1C. These boots are amazing for this build. They give extra evasion. They give 30% ailment immunity. They come with 30% movement speed and life. These beat out any rare boots outside of expensive rare boots that you're going to have to craft yourself, which might cost over a divine. If you don't mind dying, you can push into red maps on this setup, but your damage is going to start to fall off a little bit, which means you might take the odd death in maps. It's up to you how you progress. You could stay in yellow maps, farming your currency much safer, or you can push your Atlas into red maps. Now, once you're at this stage and you're into red maps and you want to push higher, this is when you really want to think about transitioning to crit and taking on the pinnacle bosses. To do that, you really want your character to be 85 plus, ideally level 87 plus. So if you're not there, feel free to grind it in yellow maps. You're going to be earning currency as you do it. So before we move on to red maps, we'll just quickly go through a few tips for gearing your character through the first few levels of maps. In terms of gear, your belt, I would recommend using a heavy belt because it has strength as an implicit, and strength and intelligence are short on this build. You are going to need to get it on gear, otherwise you're not going to be able to equip your gear and use your skill gems. This is especially important when you go crit because our intelligence requirement goes up even more. To help along with that, I'd also recommend that your amulet is a negate amulet. This comes with implicits of strength and intelligence. Again, it's going to help out. You may need to have a strength suffix on one of your items and an intelligence suffix on one of the items. If you do that, you're going to have no problems with your attributes. And now we're just going to talk about flasks, and these are super, super important. Not only is the type of flask you use important, but the rolls you put on your flask can add huge amounts of defensive power to the build. So the flask you're going to want for your non-crit version, you're going to want a granite flask, which gives you armor, and then you want to have a suffix of increased armor. You want a jade flask, which gives you increased evasion, your suffix, increased evasion. You want a quicksilver flask for increased movement speed, and I'd recommend your suffix on this is attack speed. Now, if you've only got your really early level flask from the campaign, you might not be able to roll your quicksilver flask yet. So don't worry about that until you pick one up in maps. Your fourth utility flask is really optional because this is placeholder to put in a crit flask, which is a diamond flask. Before you go crit, I'd recommend a sulfur flask. It just gives you more damage and creates consecrated ground that gives you some life regen. For suffixes on this, you can go for reduced effective curses, reduced chance to be stunned. There's quite a few suffixes you can use, but none of them are vital. For your life flask, you want a divine life flask with instant use, and you want corrupted blood immunity on it. All of the flasks can easily be rolled with alterations and augmentations. You could look to buy them on trade, but you're probably going to overpay for them. You should have collected a lot of alterations from selling gear to vendors and just picking them up in your early maps. You should be able to roll all of these flasks yourself. Now, in terms of pushing to red maps, you've got everything you need. To start going to higher tiers, you are going to want a 6 link because adding in an extra support gem just gives you more damage. You don't really need to play around with any of your gear, but if you wanted to eke out more damage, things like elemental damage with attacks on belts, on rings, flat elemental damage on rings, and an amulet can all help. Quivers also can roll with massive elemental flat damage. So if you rolled a very bog standard quiver very early on with your Screaming Essences, get some Shrieking Essences of Woe and get crafting. I would recommend for crafting that you follow the written guide because it explains how to buy items on trade, how to buy crafting bases on trade, and then how to craft. It's very, very detailed. I don't want to spend 20 or 30 minutes going through it on the video because people aren't going to follow it. Go to the written guide. It's got step-by-step details of how you craft the gear. And now we're going to look to transition to crit and kill the pinnacle bosses. So for this, like I said, you need your 6 link. You're going to need a new bow. The base of these bows is either going to be a spine bow or an ivory bow. Ideally, this bow wants to have 700 elemental DPS. You want 1.5 attacks per second or more, and you need a base crit chance on the bow of 7.75% or higher. You're also going to want to get a new quiver with big crit multi, big damage of bows, and hopefully another damaging modifier. Again, refer to the written guide. It shows you how to go about getting these items in the best methods. That's really all that you need. You're then going to tweak your gear to make sure it's optimal. You've got life, resistances, you've got decent evasion, and you've got damage on other items where possible. The other thing that can add a good chunk of damage when you go crit is putting a cheap anointment on your amulet called High Voltage. This gives you 100% crit chance against shocked enemies. As long as you have lightning damage on your bow and you're critting, you're going to be shocking. And 100% increased crit damage is very hard to get. Now at this stage, when you've gone to a 6 link, you are going to need to make some more adjustments because there's some things that are going to start to feel bad. First thing you want to do, take the mastery on your spell suppression wheel to give extra crit chance. This is huge. You're then obviously going to need to respec the tree to get out of precise technique and into crit. Again, either follow the POB or the written guide. You're going to want to get a rare helmet, replace your unique helmet because you want to get mana cost on this helmet. Again, follow the guide for the instructions. The most important thing you're going to want to do is unlock the craft for non-channeling skills cost less mana. This is got from Elrion in Syndicate. He always starts in the leader of research. So all you would do as you're going through your mapping zones is every time you come across a Syndicate encounter in a map and you go into the research safe house, If Elrion turns up, make sure you imprison him, because that's going to take him out of the leadership position, which means he's going to turn up more often in research. All you need to do is hope that he drops an item of jewelry, unveil it, and unveil the minus mana cost to attacks. If you unveil the channeling cost, that will still unlock the other one. So you either need to unveil non-channeling skills, cost less mana, or channeling skills, cost less mana. If you can, you want to craft this definitely on 2 rings. Amulet would also be handy. However, if you get minus mana cost of attacks on your helmet, you won't need to put it on your amulet. And really, that should be comfortable for clearing the pinnacle bosses because they're a bit easier than their full forms. You are likely to die, don't get me wrong. This is a mapping character. The bosses that we have to kill are more of an inconvenience to then carry on our journey mapping. Do not worry if you lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 portals on these bosses. You're going to be able to get them down. Getting these 2 void stones opens up a lot easier map sustain. It means you're going to be able to stay in your tier 14 to T16 maps. You're going to start getting more map completion and you're going to start making more currency with league mechanics. Now we're going to talk about your push to Uber Elder and Maven. Now for new players, Uber Elder and Maven are on another level compared to your pinnacle bosses. There's lots of more complicated mechanics, they hit harder and they've got a lot more life. It is doable on Rain of Arrows, it takes a bit of investment, but it also takes a bit of game knowledge. Don't expect to go into these fights on your first encounter and succeed. You are very likely to fail. The issue is, they're quite hard to build up the keys for, and if you wanted to buy them, they're very expensive. But if it is your first build or one of your first leagues, and you've even got this far, you've done really, really well. So, you want to push on to Uber Elder. I'm quickly going to cover off what you need. All the crafting stuff, again, is going to be in the full guide. You're going to want a big elemental damage bow, sort of 800 plus, with attack speed and crit chance. These, if they aren't available on the market, you can craft, but they're going to cost you 4 to 5 divines to do it. Along with that, you're going to want to make sure you've got a big quiver. If you've only got a quiver with a bit of crit multi, bit of damage of bows and nothing else, get a quiver with big flat damage, big crit multi, big damage of bows and prod speed, as much damage as you can get into that quiver as possible. You're going to want to craft basically all of your gear again, which you're going to do with fractured items and essences. Again, refer to the written guide. So the last thing we're going to cover off is unique jewels that you want on your build. Now, all I'm going to do is go through the jewels and the stats that you're looking for. It's easy for me to put the full crafting or purchasing guides for these in my written guide because it's going to include a Legion jewel, which is very complicated, some cluster jewels, and a unique jewel. So all I'm going to do is talk through your options. Your first option for ease, but I think it's expensive and you end up with slightly less damage, is a Lionized Full Viridian Jewel. Now what these do, as you can see by the description, is NA melee or melee weapon type modifiers in the radius of this jewel are transferred to bow modifiers. So you can see the radius is really big. And if you slot it here, you can get access to all these claw nodes and all these dagger nodes, which in-game are going to count as bow nodes. So you're going to get loads of crit chance and loads of attack speed. The issue with these jewels, they're quite popular and they're now very rare. These are likely to be 2 to 3 divines at league start and they're just not worth the currency. So what do I recommend you do as an alternative? And it's cluster jewels. We can craft some very cheap and easy cluster jewels that are going to give us as much, if not more damage than the Lionize. Your critical strike chance is going to fall off a little bit, but your damage is going to be more, so it will even out. What you're looking for is a 8 passive attack damage cluster jewel with basically any 3 mods on it. It doesn't matter. We're really using this to get to medium clusters. If you can get one with Calamitous and Martial Prowess on it, great. They're probably the 2 best nodes. We don't need Feed the Fury because we already have Leech, but if you get Feed the Fury with Fuel the Fight, that handles all of your Leech, so you can drop the Leech nodes on the tree. All you're going to do is take the first 2 nodes. Unless the back node is worth taking 2 passive points for, don't do it. Let's say the main reason for this cluster jewel is to get 2 medium clusters into play. The mediums are projectile damage, 4 or 5 passives with repeater and streamlined. You can chaos spam these for about 40 chaos a jewel. You could craft them with alt regals, or you could just buy them. They're not going to be expensive. And then for your jewels slotted into here, I'd recommend a rare jewel with attack speed and life. And then I would recommend, depending on their price, they're normally not too bad, a Watcher's Eye with crit multi while affected by anger. If these are too expensive, precision attack speed is also really good. If all the Watcher's Eyes are too expensive, just get another life and attack speed with bows jewel. And then the last jewel I'd recommend is a Lethal Pride. So Lethal Pride is a Legion jewel that adds strength to your small passives, but it also gives extra mods to any of the main stats that you've got allocated. So if we look here on Quickstep, it's added 5% chance to deal double damage. It's going to go through it in detail in the written guide, but essentially you are looking for a jewel that has 5% double damage and chance to intimidate on hit. If you can get a combination of these two for 2 divines or less, you're going to get a really good jewel and it's going to really boost your damage up. And that's all you really need to do for jewels. If you're a new player and you're really struggling to get your head around jewels, I'm going to put an alternative tree in the POB and in the written guide that avoids taking any of these jewels. Your damage will be a little bit less, but you're still going to be able to get really, really far and you're going to be comfortable farming T16 maps. However, if you do want to get to Uber, Elder and Maven, every bit of damage helps. So any of these options are going to give you a lot of increased damage. So there's a few things to quickly run through before we get onto gem links, and it's something that people will ask about. Firstly, the bandit quest in Act 2, what you're doing, and you are killing all bandits for 2 skill points. Next thing is Pantheons. Because we're already ailment immune, it makes 100% sense to take Soul of Lunaris. Our character is made mainly for mapping. We're going to get increased fizz damage reduction and increased movement speed. When you filled it all out, you'll also get a chance to avoid projectiles, reduced LE damage taken, and a really important one, avoiding projectiles that have chained. Because we're putting ballistas down, there is potential for projectiles to chain off of your ballistas and kill you, and this avoids that happening. Your minor Pantheon is up to you. It really depends on the content you're doing. I always run Searing Exile altars in T14 plus maps, and they drop Burning Ground everywhere, and it hurts a character with no regen. So I'm always going to have Burning Ground on. If, however, you're running a character that's doing Eater altars and you never see any Burning Ground, you might want to take something different. You might want to take less duration of poisons and reduce chaos damage taken, because they can drop a lot of horrible chaos damage. It's totally up to you. Have a look through the minor Pantheons and see what best suits your build. And then for Annoints on Amulets, I recommend High Voltage just because it gives a lot of crit chance for your build. If you want to anoint an amulet and you don't have your crit variant yet, there's a few different things you can take. If you're not path tier yet, Fury Bolts is just really good. Projectile speed, projectile damage and strength. And it is really, really cheap oils. It's 2 greens and a cyan. The other really good one to take if you're non-crit is Divine Judgment. It's a teal, black, I called it cyan earlier, I meant teal. Teal, black and brown oil, whatever they're called. 50% elemental damage. Luckily, when 321 is released, it will list the oils underneath, so you don't have to remember what silly names they give them. When you crit, as I said, I'd recommend High Voltage. Other good cheap anoints, True Strike, 15% crit multi, 45% crit chance. Again, fairly cheap anointment. Black oil might be 4 to 5 C at league start. The rest will be 1 to 2 chaos. But as I say, I tend to go High Voltage because you're not going to get to 100% crit chance. 100% increased crit is massive damage. When I do my numbers through POB, this is always the highest DPS anoint, and we're always shocking because we're always critting. So in this section of the video, we're going to run through the POB and the gem links. I'm only very quickly going to touch on your endgame 6 link for crit and non-crit for the gems, and just quickly run through the others because they're available in both the POB and the written guide. I don't want to do lots of duplication. So the POB, I've done it as detailed as I can. So you've got skill sections here, depending on what level you are in the game, and then you just need to look at what's available in the skills, and you'll need to make changes. Most of them will be where you get vendor rewards. So example, level 16, you're going to get Herald of Ice from a vendor. Level 28, when you kill Gravicius, you're going to change your ballista setup to go artillery ballista. It's fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. And then when you get through to your non-crit, it's got your ideal 6 links. And then again, for your crit damage, it's got your ideal 6 links. And where I felt it's important, I've just put a few notes in. So like you insert Vial Haste, but you don't reserve mana, so you don't use haste. It's just the Vial version when it becomes available. And just a note here to have your 6 link in your chest, because if you need to change your bow, you don't want to have to then 6 link it again, which is why I would recommend, which I go through in the guide, only 5 link in your ballistas, unless you've got a ton of currency, because if you want to upgrade your bow, you've got to make sure that bow is a 6 link, which costs a bit of currency. So along with your skill sections, you've got your leveling sections as well, depending on what stage of the game you're at. Now, there's a few mini respecs, so you just need to keep an eye on the tree. So if we try and find one of them, here's an example. So in the 51 to 60 tree, we're going down here and we're taking these leech nodes here. But once you hit 61 to 70, we reach the leech nodes up there. So we can drop these nodes here and we just path down here because it's more efficient. And then we refund these points here. There's a few like that, but there's no major respecs. There's just a few points added here and there. Along with that, we've got item setups. Now, I've obviously not included anything when you're leveling because it's going to be your solo self-found gear essentially. So where we're going to start is a 5-link chest, beginning maps. Very, very cheap gear. And I've recommended how to craft these if they're anything other than life resistance gear. So all of this stuff here is really just going to be life and resistance gear. What I've done, I've taken a note out of POBS' book and added some notes where I think it's important to know things. So for example, you might be slightly short on intelligence, so you might need to get intelligence on one gear, and a heavy belt is going to help with your strength requirements, but again, you might need to find strength on one item early on. The only unique we're going to use is Devoto's Devotion. If it's any more than a few C, just stick a rare helmet on. Imperial Bow you're going to craft with Screaming Essences of Wrath, and your Quiver with Essences of Woe. And as you go through your different setups, so gearing, getting ready for red map, so this would still be non-crit, then your crit swap, and then what I recommend for Uber Elder. Now, there's a detailed crafting or purchasing guides within the written Google Doc, so there are no notes in this POB, because it's much harder to format and much more annoying to format than doing it in a Google Doc or a Word doc. So all that's here is a link to that document, and then a link to my playlist on YouTube that's got all the Reign of Arrows stuff you could ever need. So, in terms of skill gems, we're just going to go, like I said, through the non-crit and the crit variant. So your 6-link for your non-crit is going to be Reign of Arrows, Mirage Archer, Trinity, Inspiration, Ellie Damage, and Added Cold. Now, I would recommend you don't really swap to a 6-link until you're going to go crit, because this Added Cold is probably the best other support gem, but it doesn't do a huge amount. So a 5-link I think is okay for your non-crit. Your Ballista setup, again, faster attacks is probably the best option for the 5th. Doesn't do that much. So we got Artillery Ballista, Added Cold, Inspiration, Focus Ballista, Ellie Damage, and then faster attacks. This could be something like Ellie Focus if you've got the intelligence for it. Simple Flame Dash for movement. Level this up as far as you can that your intelligence allows. Precision. You want to try and keep this at level 1 if you can, but realistically, at this stage, you're going to need to level it up a little bit. You just want to make sure that the mana is still manageable. Just put a note here to add life tap to your mark setup, because our mana that's available is going to start going down and down, and Sniper's Mark with mark on hit costs a lot of mana. So just a life tap to it. We only use it on rare or unique enemies, so you're not even going to notice this using your life pool. And then the auras, we're going to use Anger, Grace, and then you've got your precision up here. That's all you really need to use. As noted here, if Anger is messing up your Trinity, but at this stage with a lightning bow you should be fine, then you can use haste. But I would recommend using Anger if you can. And then we just got a Blood Rage to generate frenzy charges. That is your non-crit setup. When you go crit, not a huge amount changes. So obviously your Reign of Arrows is going to change, but all you're doing is replacing that Added Cold with increased crit damage, and this is your 6-link. For your Ballista, again, you're dropping the faster attacks, added crit damage goes in. Flame Dash stays the same. Precision, you now want to push up to 20 because we're going to need the crit side of it as well. Sniper's Mark stays the same. Auras stays the same. The only thing I would say is if you can fit a Defiance banner in, go for it, but it's unlikely. Your Blood Rage again for frenzy charges. And we're adding in a Vile Haste, and just use the Vile version. Don't try and reserve this. And there's just a note here to keep your 6-link for your Reign of Arrows in your chest if you can, because there'll be a couple of times where you want to upgrade your bow and you don't really want to have to 6-link it. So what I recommend for your Ballista, because it's really just there to supplement your DPS, is I would probably keep this as a 5-link and not worry about the 6-link, but it's up to you. So you just have to make sure as you're going through the POB that if you want to look at what rough damage you should aim for, that you select the right tree. So if you're early crit and you don't have any clusters but you're level 92, select the crit tree, go over to the gear and select the red map crit swap, and it will tell you what your DPS is. Now this is set up just for the Reign of Arrows, and this is, I'm pretty sure, 1 arrow, so you should be doing much more damage than this. Now with the configuration, you can only set one configuration. You can't set it depending on like gear or tree, so this is set for the end game version. So there are going to be things here that maybe don't affect your character's gear in your early stages, but it's going to boost damage. So if you're non-crit, you're not going to shock. So you're not going to get this 12% here. You're not going to ignite either. There's things here like added crit that come from a Abyss Jewel. If you don't have that, then obviously that's going to affect your damage. But it's not too much of an issue. There's only a few things. You may be going to gain 5 to 10% DPS. So it will give you a good idea of where you are. Same again here. This is the only other one because I recommend the Lethal Pride with Intimidate. That again is going to make a difference to your damage. So all you need to do is make sure that you select the right gear corresponding to the right tree and then the right skills. That's all you need to do. So all we're going to do to close off the video is run through the additional content that's available if you need help. The first thing is loot filters. I have a bow leveling loot filter and a filter for early mapping. And I have a very, very high-end strict filter that I would only use if you are farming T16 maps and you want to just cut out all of the rubbish currency and rares. So all you need to do if you want to follow it is you just use this URL that will be linked in the video description. You're going to go over to loot filters and you're going to click follow. You're going to follow bow leveling, bow mapping, and then if you want to, the strict filter. And then just use bow leveling in a campaign. Once you get to maps, use bow mapping. Now there is a ton of content from Reign of Arrows on my YouTube channel from last league. It's all still going to be relevant. When the patch notes come up, because I'm recording this pre-patch, I'll put any notes in all the video descriptions if there's any changes, and I'll just all update them to say they're 321 viable. What I will do to make it easier, because there is a lot of videos, is these are all going to be put into a playlist, which I'll link in the video description. So there'll be a league start guide from last league, a leveling guide, if you want to transition to a tornado shot, the first aid kit, which is basically some do's and don'ts and some helpful advice, and then all of the updates from 320. As I mentioned, there's going to be a full POB in the video description with act-by-act breakdown. It's not going to be super detailed in the notes in terms of leveling because there is a separate written guide for that, which is here. I still need to finish it off and just do the Uber Elder upgrades, but then this is good to go. So you will have your POB, you'll have your loot filters, you have your full written guide, and you've got the video guide. All of this should give you a super, super smooth league start. So let's go over 321 changes. Now, this could take a long time if I went through it in detail, but I don't want to drag out the video. So I'm really going to quickly go over briefly what the differences are going to be. The main issue is we've lost mana reservation masteries for precision and for grace. So if you go here, you can see you search reservation, there's 21 hits. So if we keep going down, we'll just go down to the ones that make a difference. And they're here. So we don't have the precision mana reservation efficiency. And then if we go down to evasion, we don't have the grace mana reservation efficiency. You can still run your 3 skills. You'll still be able to run anger, grace, and precision, but you're going to have to run a low level precision. So what we'd do instead of taking this mastery, and I've updated the POBs, is we'd take the one that gives dex per accuracy, or accuracy per dex even. The reason being is because we're running a lower level precision, accuracy might become a tiny bit of a problem. That node just sorts it all out, and it means although you lose a bit of crit chance from not running a higher level precision, you're still going to have the mana to activate your skills. Along with that, there is a new reservation added for leech, which is going to make it easier to run with lower mana. So if we go to leech masteries, this node is absolutely huge. 10% of leech is instant. What this means is as long as you've got mana and life leech, you're going to see these big chunks come back to your mana and life. And in fact, you probably won't ever see your mana go down. So because of that, you're going to be able to run a lower mana pool than before. So even though you might only be able to get your precision up to say 12 or 13, we can get away with the rest of the reservation nerfs. It's not too much of an issue. I imagine there's other builds that are going to be having much more issues with that. So anywhere in the skill tree where you take a major leech passive and you get access to the mastery, always take 10% of leeches instant. It's not going to be in the POB because it's not available yet, but every time you're at a major node, take that mastery. The other nerf is to spell suppression masteries. There was an amazing mastery that gave 100% crit based on your spell suppression. So if you had 100% spell suppression, you got 100% critical strike chance, which is absolutely massive. And it's basically one node to get 100% crit chance. They've removed it. Now, I think they've done it for 2 reasons. One, it doesn't really suit the suppression wheel, but I was hoping it might move to the crit one. It hasn't. It's just gone. Secondly, we've got a new lead mechanic that has basically skill trees added to weapons. Critical strike chance is a really common mod on weapons, so I imagine it's going to be common in the tree as well. and I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to make up for it. Other than that, there's not really any differences, but a lot of the bow nodes have changed. Where they gave attack speed and accuracy, they now just give like attack speed. Where they gave attack speed and damage, they just give attack speed. So you're still going to take all those bow nodes. They're just slightly less powerful than before, because we lose stuff that is important for Rain of Arrows, like accuracy, prod speed, and attack speed with bows. And we gain bow attacks, fire, an additional arrow, which for Rain of Arrows doesn't do a lot because we fire 20 plus arrows. But you shouldn't see too much of a difference. Now, there is an attack cluster added. Unfortunately, they've not given us a clue what any of it means, other than when you get to the main node, it gives you another additional projectile. So that is 2 more when we fire 20 arrows. So that is actually a decent DPS increase. So with these 2 balanced out with the ones they've changed, you shouldn't really see a difference to your DPS. Now, I can't add this cluster in because it's not in POB, but we're going to lose a few points on the tree for masteries that don't exist. So I would recommend 100% taking this cluster because you're going to go straight past it on the tree. It's on our pathing. And that's kind of it. There's not much more to go through. So we do lose quite a bit of critical strike chance in the end game version. But again, you're going to get so much power on your weapon that you're going to be running better than it was going to run last league. So I'm not worried about it at all. So I've made changes to the POB where Onslaught, for example, doesn't exist as a leveling gem, so I've switched it out. Sniper's markers come in earlier, so you can now equip that from level 4, which gives us more DPS early on. So overall, I think the leveling experience should feel a little bit better, and it was already really good. End game, if you don't get anything good on your bow, you're going to suffer from crit chance, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be some hugely powerful mods that you're going to roll on weapons that are going to more than make up for it. So I've changed the written guide and I've changed the POB. The issue is I'm not going to be able to change them any further because I'm out of the country from Sunday and I'm not back until the Tuesday after league start, which means I won't be able to put updated POBs in or passive trees, and I may not be able to update my loot filters. Now, I do have internet access, so hopefully I'll be able to just log on to Filterblade once it's live on league start day and just update the filters. That shouldn't be a problem. If you do go into the game and you start and you try and load up one of my filters and it says it's invalid, it means I haven't been able to get on to update them. Just run Never Syncs soft semi-strict filter for leveling and then just strict filter for mapping. You'll be absolutely fine. So I'm going to put notes in the POB about masteries that you want to take, masteries that no longer exist, and new nodes to look out for. And I have removed any masteries that no longer exist, but I'm not going to be able to give you a 321 tree. But overall, there's so much detail in the written guide and the POB that I think you're going to have a super smooth league start. Anyway, if you want to try out some of the new masteries, go for it. It's a point or two. You can always refund it if it doesn't work. That's it for the video. As I say, there are lots of changes and lots of sneaky nerfs that GGG have added in. But overall, the build should be absolutely fine. It should still pretty much function as it did last league with a few minor changes. That's it for the video. Hope everyone has a good league start. And I'll try and get on and race as fast as I can when I get back on Tuesday. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.